So today's video is going to be a little bit different because I'm going to talk about my experience with epilepsy, or as I like to call it, full body twerking. Not going to happen. Hello everybody and happy Monday. So before we get started, standard disclaimer, my experience is different from other people's experiences and I'm not a medical professional and all that jazz. And to be honest, I don't often like to talk about my epilepsy, and the people that I've met who have epilepsy as well tend not to bring it up either. There's a misconception that it's associated with some sort of mental illness. It's a neurological issue which also happens in the brain, but it's not a psychiatric disorder. Which isn't a stigmatized psychiatric, you're a reasonable person, let's move on. So to be diagnosed with epilepsy, you have to have had more than one seizure in your lifetime, and these have to be unprovoked seizures, so it can't be like, well, I had 47 beers and then I started twitching. Now, these seizures can manifest themselves in different ways. You can have absent seizures where you're just kind of not there for a while. You can have muscle twitches and stuff where you're still conscious, or you can have the kind that I have, which are called clonic-tonic seizures, because that sounded kind of upbeat and peppy. It's actually not very upbeat and not really peppy, so kind of a misleading name, and unfortunately, I can't tell you really anything about it. The only experience that I've had with the tonic-clonic seizure is observing someone else having one. Because one of the problems, at least with my seizures, is that I experience about 4 hours of permanent amnesia surrounding each episode. And for me, it's different from, say, passing out or falling asleep, because when that happens, you have kind of this timeline of things that happen in your life before you go to sleep or pass out or whatever. You wake up and then there's the things that are after, and you realize there's kind of that missing chunk. For me, there's absolutely no association between stuff that happened before and after. It's very difficult for me to even realize that those happen in the same month or the same day or anything. The whole idea that there's a gap there implies that there's some linear track that just isn't in my brain anymore. So the point is, very little of what I know about epilepsy comes from actual direct experience. A lot of it is researching and then trying to piece together things about what was going on in my life after the fact. So I've had about 5 seizures in my life, I think. The amnesia honestly makes it difficult to remember how many there were. The first one was when I was 16. I was playing a game on the computer. I was in a cheery mood, things were going well, and that's the end of the story there, because I don't want to say I blacked out and then, because there is no and then when you have that sort of amnesia gap. But from what I understand, my brain decided to go all Emperor Palpatine. I have another distinct memory of a time that was later than that, of being in the hospital and my family being there and my mom asking me questions, you know, how old was I, what was my name, things like that. And one thing in particular, she asked me to tell her what I had done that whole day. And so I went through the day step by step. I had gotten up, I had gotten on the bus, I had gone to class, I had gone to this class and that class, and I remember going through every single step. And several hours later, I realized, no, I hadn't been to school at all that day because I had had a dental appointment in the morning and didn't go in until the afternoon. My brain was lying to me, or to be more precise, it was trying to piece together information that it knew it should have, but for some weird reason didn't. I've had 4 more of those types of seizures, and with the exception of one where I happened to be talking online to someone, so I actually had timestamps, I have no idea what was happening in the few hours before and the few hours after. I do know that I tend to seize for about 5 to 10 minutes, I tend to be unconscious for about 40, and the first time when my parents called the paramedics and stuff, by the time they were strapping me onto the gurney, I was awake and apparently very, very pissed off and crabby toward them. What I do know from direct experience is that for about the week following, my body is incredibly weak, to the point where I have to use my arms to lift up my legs to get into a car or over the bathtub lip, that sort of thing. Now, there are medications for epilepsy. I take levetiracetam twice daily, morning and night, and I will probably continue taking this for a significant portion of my life. The unfortunate thing about the medication is that the only way that they can determine that you're taking the correct dose is whether or not you continue to have seizures. The frequency of seizures can vary greatly from person to person. For me, the last seizure I had was over 2 years ago, and the one before that was about 2.5 to 3 years ago. Some people can have them daily, but for me, because I don't know quite how frequently I would otherwise be having the seizures, I'm still just kind of hopeful that the dosage is right. It's also worth noting, just because this is a bit of a misconception, I'm personally not sensitive to flashing strobe lights. About 3 to 5% of people with epilepsy are, but the causes can vary, and in my case, there is no known trigger that makes me do what I do. Now, there's a part of me that feels almost guilty for making this video, because as far as epilepsy goes, I've got a pretty light version. I don't need to worry about this on a daily or weekly or even monthly basis. There are only 3 ways that this has affected my life. The first one is that I basically always need to have health insurance. The cost of getting an ambulance to take me to a hospital where basically they don't really do anything, because there's nothing they can do. They just kind of monitor you, make sure you're not doing anything crazy, and then let you go. That altogether costs around $10,000 to $12,000, which out of pocket, at the drop of a brain is kind of scary. The second one is that I don't drive. Now, law varies by state as far as how long you have to go without having a seizure to keep your license, but I've definitely been in the case before where I've had a great job and then basically had to quit with no notice because I suddenly had to surrender my license. So honestly, this is one of the biggest reasons that I moved to New York, because it's one of the few places in the world where the inability to drive doesn't completely make me dependent upon other people. The third, and this is one that I haven't solved yet and honestly still really terrifies me, is the depression and psychological impact of having seizures. Now, when you fall down and break your leg, you have this idea that, oh, darn it, my leg's broken. But when my brain breaks and tells me fabrications about what happened, and I realize that my entire perspective could just go, that's my identity. It's not... We have this idea of dualism, that there's kind of this soul that's watching our brain think and do things, but when I, in my head, cannot step away from that and perceive myself having the seizure or realize that I'm dealing with amnesia or things like that, it's coming to terms with the idea that my me is broken. Now, of course, this is something that most people deal with at some point in their life, oftentimes when they're dealing with a parent or a grandparent who's suffering from some form of dementia. But for me, it's kind of terrifying at 16 to realize that I was comfortable with the idea that, you know, you can lose your arm at any time. It's tragic, but it can happen. Reconciling the idea that based on a single electron going weird in my brain, my whole sense of I could just be gone. So after a seizure, in addition to physically just not wanting to move, I mentally kinda don't want to live for a while. So anyway, I just wanted to share my experience with epilepsy with you guys, because it's not something that I acknowledge about myself much of the time, mostly because it is a rather depressing thought and it's not something that I'm necessarily entirely ready to come to grips with. Thanks for listening. Have a fantastic Monday, and I will see you on Wednesday.